It's strange how doubt creeps in, almost unnoticed at first. It starts small, a glance, a shift in behavior, but it grows, whispering in the back of your mind until you can't ignore it any longer. I began to feel it not long ago. At first, I brushed it off. After all, we've been married for almost a decade. Life gets busy. People change, right? But then I started to notice the little things that didn't add up. For one, the phone. For years, we were open about everything, leaving our phones lying around without a second thought. But suddenly, hers was always out of sight, tucked away in her purse or in another room. When she left it unattended, she'd return quickly to check it, her eyes darting nervously. At first, I thought I was imagining things. She's a lawyer, so maybe it was work-related, something confidential. But the unease in her movements, her stiff posture, the quick glances at her screen, started to gnaw at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then came the late-night texts. At first, I thought it was nothing, just her usual work stuff. But she'd started putting her phone on silent, disappearing to the bathroom with it, or texting with her back turned. I couldn't ignore it any longer. There was a distance in her voice, too, like she was always somewhere else, even when she was right there with me. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe I was overthinking. But then, one evening, I saw him. A man standing at the newsstand, chatting with her like they were old friends. The smile he gave her wasn't casual. It was warm, intimate, like a smile reserved for someone special. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just a friendly encounter. There was something between them, something I didn't know about. When she noticed me standing there, her smile faltered, just a bit too much. She quickly turned away, like she was caught off guard. I tried to brush it off, but I knew better now. I wasn't imagining things. That night, I overheard a conversation she had on the phone. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," she whispered. "He's starting to suspect something." My heart sank. The pieces were coming together, and I didn't like the picture they painted. There was someone else in her life, and I had no idea who they were. The only thing I knew for sure was that everything was about to change. The next few days were a blur of confusion and quiet frustration. I couldn't stop thinking about the man at the newsstand, the way my wife had acted when she saw me. It wasn't just the smile, it was the way she looked at him, the familiarity in her eyes, like they shared something I didn't even know existed. I couldn't shake it. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, but I couldn't pretend everything was normal either. I started watching her more closely, noting every little shift in her behavior. It wasn't long before more cracks started to show. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the way she became so protective of her phone. It was all stacking up. I kept thinking back to that phone conversation I overheard. The way she had said, "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." It gnawed at me, like a key piece of the puzzle that was just out of reach. Who was she talking to? What had she been hiding? I tried asking her about it. Casually, of course, nothing too direct. "You've been pretty distant lately," I said one night as we sat at dinner. She gave me that tight smile, the one she'd been giving me more and more, and shrugged. "Work's been busy," she said, then quickly changed the subject. The conversation didn't go anywhere, and I could tell she was relieved when it ended. But I wasn't satisfied. There was something behind those words, something she wasn't telling me. A few days later, I followed her. I told myself it was just curiosity, but deep down I knew what I was doing. I didn't want to believe it, but I had to know the truth. I parked down the street and waited. After about 20 minutes, I saw her leave the house and head toward the car. She drove in the direction of that same newsstand. This time, I stayed hidden. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but it was worse than I could have imagined. When she arrived, she didn't just stop to buy something. She pulled over, parked, and walked straight to him, the man from the newsstand. And just like the last time, they smiled at each other. But this time, it was even more obvious. They were together. I wanted to confront them, but my body wouldn't move. I stood frozen, heart pounding, as they embraced for a moment. The sight was enough to shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I couldn't turn back now. I had to know who he was, what they were to each other. But for now, all I had was the undeniable truth that she was hiding something. And it was much bigger than I could have ever guessed. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, betrayal, confusion, they all swirled inside me, each feeling more intense than the last. I couldn't stop replaying the scene over and over in my mind. Her walking toward him, the way they embraced. I felt sick to my stomach. And yet, I couldn't stop myself from thinking about it. I had to know more. I couldn't let this go unanswered. That night, I stayed up later than usual, pretending to work on some late project. She had gone to bed early, tired from the long hours she'd been putting in at the office. It was the perfect time to dig deeper. I sat quietly in the living room, staring at my phone screen, scrolling through everything I could find. Her social media, her messages, anything that could shed light on who this man was. The social media was where I struck gold. I went through her old posts, looking for any mention of him. After what seemed like hours of digging through birthday photos and work-related updates, I found a picture from last year. She was standing with him, her arm around his waist. It was clear now. This man wasn't just some casual acquaintance. He was someone important to her, someone who had been in her life for much longer than I had realized. I found a few more posts that mentioned him, always tagged as just a friend, but the comments from their mutual friends told a different story. You two are adorable together. When's the wedding? One friend had commented, and another, can't wait to see you two again this weekend. It was then that I realized just how deep this went. They weren't just having a fling. This was something much more serious. I had spent months wondering if I was overreacting, but now it was clear. My wife was in love with this man. She had been for a while. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to confront her, but I couldn't just blurt it out. I needed to be sure, to have everything lined up. But as the days passed, the more I thought about it, the more I realized something strange. There was one thing I hadn't yet figured out. Who was he really? How did they meet? And why did he matter so much to her? These questions burned in my mind, and no matter how many answers I found, I still didn't know the full story. One thing I didn't know, I couldn't face her until I had the whole picture. But the pieces were falling into place. I just needed to connect the dots, and when I did, everything would change. I couldn't keep living in limbo, caught between suspicion and the painful urge to confront my wife. The more I pieced things together, the more I realized that if I didn't act soon, I might lose everything. She wasn't just hiding things from me. She was living a double life. And I was on the outside, looking in, unable to do anything about it. I had to be smart about this. The idea of confrontation loomed over me, but I wasn't ready to blow everything up without getting the full picture. It wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about understanding why. Why had she chosen this man? How long had this been going on? Was I just blind to everything, or had I missed all the signs? And, most importantly, who was he to her? I had to find out more. So I began watching her even more closely. I'd noticed before that she had been spending more time on her phone, texting late at night, but now I started tracking her movements. I knew where she was going during the day, what time she came back home, who she was talking to. It wasn't healthy, but I was desperate. I couldn't just sit back and let her lie to my face anymore. It started with small things. I made sure to go through her phone while she wasn't around. I wasn't proud of it, but I had no choice. Her phone was practically glued to her hand, and she'd been more protective of it than ever. I couldn't just keep guessing. I needed the truth. I skimmed through her messages, desperate to find anything concrete, but there was nothing in plain sight. That's when I thought about the newsstand man again. The guy she'd been seeing, if he was indeed just a friend, should have had some trace online, right? Maybe he wasn't a stranger after all. Maybe he was someone with a past that could be uncovered. So I went down a different route. I started digging through her contact list. And that's when I found his name, David. Not just an acquaintance. David, who worked at the newsstand near the corner. I had a name now, a place to start. But who was David really? A coworker? A casual friend? Or something more? There were still too many unanswered questions. But now I had enough to confront her, not just with suspicions, but with facts. I had to prepare myself for whatever she might throw at me. The truth was coming, whether I was ready for it or not. I decided it was time to set my plan in motion. I had to know everything about this David. Who he was, how long he'd been in her life, and what role he played in this twisted story. I couldn't go in blind. But little did I know, there was a twist waiting for me, something that would change everything I thought I knew about this affair. The more I uncovered, the more my suspicions seemed to take root. David wasn't just a random person in her life. He was someone much more significant. At first, I thought he was just a brief fling, someone she'd met recently. But as I dug deeper, I realized how wrong I had been. It started with his full name. After tracking it down through mutual friends and his social media, the pieces began to fall into place. He wasn't just some guy at a newsstand. He had been involved in her life for much longer than I had realized. The Facebook photos I found were enough to make my blood run cold. They were old photos, vacations, family gatherings, moments of casual joy shared between them over the years. These weren't the photos of an occasional acquaintance. This was someone embedded in her world, someone I hadn't seen. The more I researched, the more I felt the walls closing in. Messages between them revealed a side of her I'd never known. Words of tenderness, inside jokes, and late-night chats about their lives. Things she'd never shared with me. It was like a secret life I was only now beginning to understand. A life I'd been completely shut out of. The biggest shock came when I found a message that stopped me in my tracks. She had forgotten to delete it, and I was the one to stumble upon it. It was a simple text, but it spoke volumes. I love you. I've never stopped loving you. I'm scared, but I want to be with you. It was from David. I could feel the ground shift beneath me. This wasn't just an affair. This was love, something far deeper and more complex. The late-night phone calls, the texts, the evasions, it was all coming together in a way that left me breathless. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was in love with him. But why didn't she leave? Why the secrecy, the lies? Why keep stringing me along? The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like there was something even darker at play. I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt like I was on the edge of something far more complicated than I could have ever imagined. The truth was more than just infidelity. It was a betrayal on a scale I hadn't even begun to understand. Now, the real question was, what was I going to do with all this knowledge? I couldn't pretend any longer. The weight of the lies, the secrecy, it had reached a breaking point. I knew I had to confront her, but that didn't make it any easier. The idea of facing her with everything I had discovered made my stomach twist in knots. This wasn't just about her affair. It was about the entire life she'd built behind my back. A life I had never known existed. That evening, she came home late again. The house felt colder than usual as I sat, waiting. It was the silence that got to me, the kind that's so thick, it wraps itself around everything. When I heard the familiar sound of her keys, the soft click of the door closing behind her, I knew I couldn't delay it any longer. There was no more pretending. I didn't sugarcoat it. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. She hesitated, almost frozen in place. About what? I didn't give her a chance to dodge. About David. For a second, her face shifted, her eyes darted to the floor, and I saw a flash of guilt. It was enough. I knew then that she knew. That she knew I knew. David? She stammered, trying to sound casual but failing. What about him? I let the words drop like bricks. I know about the photos, the texts, the everything. I watched her closely, gauging her reaction. I know you're in love with him, and I need to know why. Why keep lying to me? Why didn't you just leave if you felt this way? Her face paled. For a moment, she looked like she was about to crack. The woman who had been so confident, so sure of herself, was now suddenly vulnerable. It was almost unrecognizable. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't know how to tell you. I couldn't contain myself. How long has this been going on? I demanded, my voice rising despite myself. She dropped her gaze, clearly struggling to hold it together. Almost a year, she said, barely above a whisper. A year. My mind raced, and I felt as though the floor had shifted beneath me. A year of lies. A year of pretending everything was fine. And here she was, standing before me, admitting it all. The betrayal felt heavier than I could carry. I wanted to scream, to throw everything at her, but something stopped me. Perhaps it was the exhaustion, the realization that there was nothing left to fight for. The conversation wasn't over, but I didn't know where to go from here. It was like the foundation of everything we had built together had just crumbled beneath us, and I was standing there, lost. The air between us felt charged, as if the entire room was holding its breath. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. The person I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone whose actions had shattered everything I believed in. I tried to process what she'd just said, but my mind was too overwhelmed by the weight of her confession. A year of lies, a year of pretending, of her playing this part of a devoted wife, all while carrying on a relationship with another man. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to punish her for what she had done. But somehow, the anger didn't come, not yet. All I felt was a hollow ache in my chest, like I had just been hollowed out by her betrayal. The woman I had trusted more than anyone had been living a double life, and I had been blind to it. I took a step back, unable to look at her for even a second longer. "How could you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "How could you do this to me? After everything we've been through?" My chest tightened, and I fought to keep my composure. "What about all the years we spent together? The vows we took?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her face. "I never meant for this to happen. I never planned for it to go this far. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I was lost in everything. Work, life, and I let this happen. I made choices I can't take back." Her voice cracked, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy. How could I? I turned away, unable to stay in that room a second longer. The tension in the air was suffocating, and every word she spoke only made it worse. "I need space," I said, not really sure if I meant it for myself or for her. She didn't argue. She didn't try to stop me, which was almost worse. She just stood there, broken, and I walked out, leaving her standing in the middle of our living room. The next few days were a blur. I didn't know what to do with myself. Every part of me screamed for answers, but I couldn't bring myself to face her again. I kept thinking about the years she had spent with David, about the secret life she had built while I was none the wiser. I thought about leaving, walking away from it all, but something kept me tethered. I wasn't sure what it was. Was it love? Or was it just the idea of love, the comfort of familiarity? Either way, I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. Something had to give, and it had to give soon. The days that followed were filled with an unbearable silence. It was as if the air itself had turned cold, heavy with the weight of what had been said. She stayed in our room, barely emerging, and I found myself avoiding her at all costs. Every conversation felt like a knife to the chest, and yet, there was nothing left to say. We were both trapped in this strange limbo where words felt pointless. How do you rebuild something when the foundation has crumbled, when everything that held you together was built on lies? I kept telling myself I needed space. I needed to figure out what to do next, but every time I closed my eyes, I was haunted by the image of her with David. The thought that she had shared things with him, things she had never shared with me, was unbearable. I had loved her for so long, trusted her in ways I didn't even trust myself, and now it felt like all that had been a cruel illusion. I found myself questioning everything. How much of our relationship had been real? How much of it had been me just living in a fantasy, unaware of what was happening right in front of me? Was she always going to be this way, hiding pieces of herself from me, building a secret world I was never allowed into? One evening, after a particularly quiet dinner, she came to me. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw the woman I once knew. Not the person who had betrayed me, but the one I had fallen in love with. She looked at me, and I could tell she was desperate for some kind of forgiveness, some kind of answer that would make this all right. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know. I didn't want to hurt you. I never meant to. I just got lost. I don't know how it happened, but I was selfish." I stared at her, trying to hold back the flood of emotions threatening to spill over. I wanted to yell at her, to tell her how much she had destroyed me. But I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to speak those words out loud. Instead, I just nodded, feeling the ache in my chest deepen. "I need time to think," I said, and it wasn't just about us. I needed time to figure out who I was now, who she was, and if there was even a chance of salvaging anything from this wreckage. She didn't argue, and again, I was struck by how different she seemed from the woman I once knew. This wasn't the woman who would have fought for me. This was someone broken, and maybe just as lost as I was. But that didn't change the fact that I was standing on the edge of something I didn't know how to navigate. In the silence that followed, I realized there was something else, something deeper gnawing at me. Even if I could find the strength to forgive, even if we could somehow move forward, I still didn't know who she really was. And that was the most terrifying part of all. Days dragged on, each one blending into the next, as if time itself had frozen in place. I moved through the motions, but I wasn't really living. The silence in the house was suffocating, thick with the tension of everything unspoken. I told myself I needed time to think, but the truth was, I was completely lost. Every thought felt tangled, every decision impossible. Could I ever forgive her? Could I ever trust her again? Or was the damage too deep to heal? That night, I went to bed early, hoping for a break from the constant, gnawing thoughts. But sleep wouldn't come. My mind raced through everything. The texts, the pictures, the years of her lies. The betrayal gnawed at me, refusing to let go. I finally drifted off, but it wasn't long before I was jolted awake by the faintest sound in the hallway. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I wondered if it was just my mind playing tricks. Then the door creaked open. She was standing there, her figure barely outlined by the soft light from the hallway. I couldn't make out her expression, but I could feel the weight of what she was about to say. "I can't keep this from you anymore," she whispered, her voice trembling, but steady. "I need to tell you everything." I sat up, a mix of fear and anticipation running through me. Was this her confession? Or was it just another attempt to justify what she'd done? She stepped into the room and sat beside me, her eyes meeting mine. "David and I," she paused, as if gathering the strength to continue. "We've been together for a long time. And I know it doesn't make anything right, but I need you to know something. It wasn't about you. It wasn't because you weren't enough. It was about me. About my own fears and insecurities. I couldn't face what I was feeling, so I ran. But none of that excuses what I did." Each word she spoke felt like a blow to my chest. I already knew most of this, but hearing her say it, so plainly, felt like a punch to the gut. I had spent so long wondering, speculating, but now, it was undeniable. "I thought I loved him," she said, the words slipping out as if they were as much a revelation to her as to me. "But I was just hiding from myself. I built this lie around us, and I couldn't see the truth." I couldn't look at her. I stared at the floor, the weight of her words pressing on me. She was broken, but so was I. And now? I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. Her eyes filled with tears, and she trembled. "I don't know. I don't know if we can fix this. But I needed to be honest with you. For once." The truth hung in the air like a cloud, and I couldn't breathe. The silence between us was deafening. I didn't know what to do with her confession or with myself. I had heard it all, but it didn't make it any easier to process. The damage was done, and now I had to figure out if there was anything left worth saving. Her words lingered in the room, suffocating the space between us. I couldn't shake the heaviness of them, even though she'd said everything I needed to hear. She had confessed, laid bare the truth I had suspected for so long. But instead of relief, all I felt was an unbearable ache. I sat there, staring at the floor, not knowing what to say. Her words, "I thought I loved him," echoed in my mind, louder than anything else. I had spent so many months wondering if I was the problem, if I had somehow failed. But hearing her admit that it wasn't me, that it was her choices, felt like being hit with a tidal wave. She was right in some ways. This wasn't about me. It wasn't a flaw in our relationship or something I had done wrong. It was her. Her fear, her running, her inability to face the truth. She had built a lie around herself, and I had been living inside it, unaware. She apologized again, her voice trembling, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow for the woman sitting before me, broken and remorseful. But it didn't change the fact that she had betrayed me, that she had been living a secret life I never even saw coming. The silence stretched on, unbearable, as I tried to gather my thoughts. What was there to say? What could I say that would fix this? I wanted to scream at her, to let out the anger that was bubbling inside me, but it felt pointless. There were no words that could make this right. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted to hurt you. I just got lost in everything." Her apology was hollow, and yet I could feel the sincerity behind it. But sincerity didn't change the reality of what had happened. It didn't erase the years she had spent lying to me, or the years before that when I had been completely oblivious to what was going on behind my back. I didn't respond at first. I couldn't. The emotions swirling inside me were too overwhelming. I was at a crossroads. Part of me wanted to walk away and never look back, but another part was still clinging to the memory of who we had been. "What now?" she asked, her voice small. I didn't have an answer for her. For once, I didn't have any answers at all. "I don't know," I muttered. "I don't know if there's anything left to save." I needed space, space to figure out what to do next, space to breathe. I needed to step away from the wreckage and try to find some clarity. "I'll give you time," she said softly, her eyes filled with pain. I nodded and stood, the weight of the moment crashing down on me. This was it, the beginning of something new, but what that would be, I didn't know. Walking away from her wasn't easy, But staying wasn't any easier, either. All I could do was take a step forward into the uncertainty. The days after that night felt like an endless stretch of time. I moved through the motions, eating, sleeping, going through the daily routines, but none of it felt real. It was as if I were living in someone else's life. I hadn't made any decisions yet, hadn't even begun to consider what came next. But the weight of the silence between us grew unbearable. We hadn't spoken much since that night. She'd given me the space I asked for, but it didn't feel like a relief. It felt like a slow suffocation. Every time I walked into a room, I felt her presence, her absence, really. There was a space that used to be filled with shared moments and small gestures of comfort, now just an empty echo. The house, once a place of warmth and laughter, now felt like a cold, indifferent shell. I found myself replaying that night over and over again. Her words, her tears, the hollow apology. Nothing seemed to change how deeply the betrayal cut. It wasn't just that she had cheated, it was that she had built an entirely different reality without me. That was the part one couldn't get past. The lies, the secrecy, the years of her pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. She hadn't trusted me enough to be honest, and now, I wasn't sure I could ever trust her again. Still, part of me struggled with the choice ahead. Was there any part of us worth saving? Was the history we shared strong enough to withstand the damage? Or was I just holding on to the past because it was easier than facing the painful truth? In the silence, my mind became my enemy. I wondered if I had missed signs, if I had been blind to her growing distance long before I noticed the cracks. But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't just me. She had chosen this, chosen to keep me in the dark. One evening, I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at a half-empty coffee cup, the weight of everything still pressing down on me. I had no answers, no solutions, just questions. What did I want? What did I need to heal? It wasn't until she entered the room, her voice tentative, that I realized I wasn't ready to end this. Not yet. I've been thinking, she said, eyes searching mine, about what comes next, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right. I looked at her, the woman who had broken me, and wondered if that was even possible. Could we truly rebuild, or was this the beginning of the end? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as we both waited for the next step. And for the first time in days, I realized that whatever came next, I was the one who had to choose. Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation, but also a glimmer of hope. She was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. But I didn't know if I could believe her. It wasn't just about her willingness anymore. It was about whether or not I could ever look at her the same way again. I stood there, my mind racing, my heart torn between the desire to rebuild and the overwhelming fear that trying to fix things would only prolong the inevitable. Could I ever trust her again? Could I ever erase the images of her and David from my mind? The thought of trying to forgive her, of pretending things could go back to normal, seemed impossible. But then, there was another part of me that didn't want to let go of everything we had, of the life we built, the memories we shared. I don't know if I can, I said finally, my voice low, raw with emotion. I don't know if I can go back to pretending nothing happened. Her eyes dropped to the floor, her shoulders slumping. I know, she whispered. I know I've ruined everything. I don't want to lose you. I'll do anything to make it right, even if it takes time. I watched her, the woman I had loved, standing before me, vulnerable, broken, and full of regret. But I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how many times she apologized, it wouldn't erase the betrayal. It wouldn't undo the trust that had been shattered. The silence between us stretched on again, and I could feel the weight of her gaze, waiting for me to say something more. But I didn't have the words. Not yet. How could I? Finally, I exhaled slowly and ran a hand through my hair. I don't know what the future holds, I said. I need time. I need to think. I can't make any promises right now. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I understand, she said quietly. I'll give you all the time you need. As she turned to leave, I felt a pang of guilt. She was doing everything she could to make this right, and yet, I was still so unsure. But the truth was, I didn't have the answers. Not yet. What I didn't know was that this wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. Maybe it could never be fixed at all. But for now, I needed space to figure out what I truly wanted. To decide if I was willing to let her back in, or if it was time to walk away. The choice was mine, and I knew I couldn't rush it. I had to make it with clarity, not out of emotion. And so I waited. For the first time in a long time, I stood still, not knowing where the road ahead would lead, but understanding that I had to take the first step on my own. Time seemed to stretch, each day dragging on as I navigated the quiet that had overtaken our home. Her apologies, her promises to change, they lingered in the back of my mind, but they didn't bring the comfort I had hoped for. I still didn't know what I wanted. I couldn't decide if the damage was too deep to heal, or if there was a chance we could rebuild. Every thought felt heavy, and yet, nothing seemed to have clarity. I spent my days trying to focus on work, on keeping my mind occupied, but every moment alone brought me back to the reality of our situation. The image of her and David, their shared smiles, their private world, it kept resurfacing. I tried to push it away, to tell myself it didn't matter, but deep down, it did. How could I trust her again when she had let someone else into a place she had kept sacred with me for so long? It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the years of hidden pieces of her life, the fact that she had kept them from me. We were supposed to be partners, supposed to share everything. But that was before the truth shattered everything I thought I knew. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, I found myself sitting on the back porch, staring at the stars, thinking about everything and nothing all at once. The house was still, almost too quiet, and I could hear the faint rustle of wind in the trees. My mind kept going back to the conversation we'd had days earlier. She had asked for time, and I had given it. But now, I realized I wasn't just giving her time. I was giving myself the chance to decide if I could even picture a future with her again. The problem was, I didn't know what I wanted. There were days when the idea of walking away felt like the only way to protect myself, to preserve what little dignity was left. But then, there were moments, quiet, fleeting moments, when I could see the woman I had loved, the woman who was still there, buried under the weight of her own mistakes. I couldn't keep living in limbo, caught between the past and the future, between anger and the remnants of love. The only way forward was to face the truth about what I could forgive, what I could live with. And to do that, I needed more than just time. I needed to confront my own feelings, to truly understand what my heart was saying. When she joined me on the porch later that evening, her footsteps tentative, I didn't know what to expect. But as she sat beside me, her eyes searching mine, I realized that, for the first time in a long while, we were both standing at a crossroads. And neither of us could move forward without deciding which path we were willing to take. She sat beside me, her presence cautious, as if the smallest movement might shatter what was left of us. The air between us felt dense, heavy with everything we hadn't said yet, all the things that had been left unsaid for too long. We weren't speaking, but we weren't avoiding each other either. For the first time in days, there was a stillness, uncomfortable, yes, but strangely honest. No one was trying to fix anything, no promises were being made, and yet, in this silence, something was shifting. It felt like we were both waiting for the other to make the first move. Neither of us knew where to begin, but the longer we sat there, the more it became clear to me that the conversation we needed to have was not about apologies or justifications. It was about acknowledging the reality of what had happened, the damage, and whether or not there was any possibility of rebuilding it. She was the first to speak, her voice breaking the quiet, but it wasn't the voice of someone seeking forgiveness. It was the voice of someone who was finally facing her actions without expectation. I don't want to lose you. I can't undo what I've done, but I'm ready to do whatever it takes to make things right. I just need you to know that. The sincerity in her words made my chest tighten. She wasn't pleading, she wasn't asking for instant forgiveness. She was simply telling me she was ready to face whatever it took. And yet, as much as I wanted to believe her, a small voice inside me questioned whether that would ever be enough. Could I really trust her again? Could I look at her without the constant reminder of everything that had been hidden from me? I don't know if I can do that, I said quietly, staring off into the distance, trying to make sense of the chaos in my mind. I don't know if I can move past this. She nodded, her face a mixture of sadness and acceptance. I understand. And I'm not asking for that right now. I'm asking for time, for you to figure out what you need. I can't expect you to just forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm here. I'll stay here, no matter how long it takes. I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her not just as the woman who betrayed me, but as someone who was still there, still willing to fight for us. even if it was unclear whether I was willing to fight with her. I need time, I said finally, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I need time to think, to figure out what I can live with. I can't promise anything right now. She didn't argue. She just nodded and sat there with me, not expecting anything more. For the first time in days, I felt a small flicker of peace, not because the answers were clear, but because, for once, I didn't have to have them. And so we waited, both of us unsure of the future, but for the first time in a long time, willing to face it, whatever it might hold. The days stretched on, each one blending into the next in a haze of silence and uncertainty. The space between us felt like an abyss. I couldn't look at her without seeing everything she had hidden, everything she had taken from me. The home that once felt like ours now felt empty, distant. She was still here, physically, but emotionally we were miles apart. And yet, the strangest thing happened in that silence. I started changing. It wasn't just about distance from her. It was about distance from myself. The person I was before the betrayal, the man who had trusted without question, was no longer the same. I wasn't sure if I could go back to that version of me, or if I even wanted to. I spent days replaying our past, sifting through the memories to understand where it had gone wrong, wondering if I could forgive her, wondering if I could ever feel the same. The anger and hurt were still there, raw and painful, but there was something else too, something buried deeper. A part of me, though hesitant and afraid, still wanted to believe that we could rebuild. But there was a point I knew I couldn't stay in this suspended state forever. The silence, the uncertainty, it wasn't fair to either of us. I had to make a decision. Could I learn to trust her again? Could I forgive her and find my way back to who we once were? Or was I fooling myself, hoping for something that could never exist? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I found myself standing in the living room, lost in my thoughts. The world outside seemed so calm, yet everything inside felt like a storm. I couldn't avoid this decision any longer. I had to decide if I was willing to give us a chance, or if it was time to walk away. I turned and saw her standing there, waiting. She had been patient, giving me the space I had asked for, not pushing. But now, in this moment, I knew it was my turn to take the next step. I've been thinking. I began, my voice steady but filled with uncertainty. I'm not ready to walk away, but I'm also not sure if I can go back to what we were. Things have changed. You've changed. I've changed. She didn't interrupt, just nodded, letting me speak. But I'm willing to try, I said, my voice quieter now. I'm willing to see if there's something left, something worth saving. She stepped forward, taking my hand, her touch warm but gentle. There was no need for more words. In that moment, we both understood that the road ahead wasn't about going back. It was about forging something new, something built from honesty, time, and effort. It wasn't going to be easy, and I wasn't sure where it would lead. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like there was a chance that we could rebuild, piece by piece, until we found something stronger. We weren't starting over. We were starting anew. And in that, there was a flicker of hope.